Don't you dare come to my graduation. If a plain old lady shows up, everyone will laugh at me. It's my big day. Do not come. I felt dizzy at Christina's words about becoming the laughingstock of everyone. Clearly, Christina did not consider me family. To her, I was an embarrassing presence. Hey, old lady. Where are you now? As soon as I answered my phone, Christina's shrieking voice pierced my ears. She spoke quickly, her voice dripping with panic. It seemed she was in a state of panic. You can't be forgiven for leaving such a ridiculous note. Where are you now? Come back home now. I could hear Dylan's voice too. Both were in a frenzy. My name is Lucy Holmes. I am a 39-year-old housewife. While working part-time at a local real estate office, I have been taking care of my daughter, Christina, and managing household chores for over a decade. I married Dylan, who had Christina from a previous marriage, 12 years ago. I met Dylan at the workplace where I worked before our marriage. At the time, I was working for a construction company, and Dylan, who came for sales, was always smiling and brought a good impression. I had once recommended Dylan's products to my company, wanting to be of help to him. As a result, his company was fortunately chosen. This led to several dinner invitations, a deepening relationship, and eventually, a marriage proposal. I gladly accepted his proposal and began preparing for marriage. Just before the wedding, Dylan confessed that he was living alone with his 6-year-old daughter. At first, I thought it was a lie. It was a story hard to believe. But it was true. I met Christina a week before the ceremony. Maybe shy, she hid behind Dylan and wouldn't come out in front of me. That was when I decided. I decided to live with Christina. I thought I should take care of her until she was a grown adult. Take care of Christina until she graduates from high school. I don't know why I thought so, but I can't forget the anxious peeping. Bracing myself, I decided to marry Dylan. It was my first marriage, and my family was quite opposed. It's absurd, they are making a fool of you, my father was very angry. But I went against my parents' wishes and got married. If I had obeyed my parents then, I might have avoided the hell that was about to begin. 12 years into this marriage. Christina is now 18. She is due to graduate from high school this year. It should be a cause for celebration. However, I could not feel genuinely happy. The thought I had when I decided to marry, to raise her into a respectable adult, lingered. Hey, old lady. Where's my t-shirt? Where did you put it? You didn't steal it, did you? Christina had started calling me old lady just 2 years after we began living together. She was kind at first. She gradually got used to me. But one day she started calling me old lady and her attitude became rough. Is this the t-shirt you're looking for? I took it out from the folded laundry and handed it to Christina. Why did you wash it? What if it shrinks? It should normally be dry cleaned. You're so clueless. Really, so slow. I thought the fabric of the t-shirt would get damaged at the dry cleaners. So I hand washed and air dried it. But I couldn't say that to Christina, and all I could reply was, I'm sorry. Christina snatched it out of my hands as if grabbing it and, with a parting shot of, really, you're useless, she walked away. Christina's words were sharp, stabbing into my heart. I couldn't argue, only apologized. I didn't understand why Christina had started to treat me so roughly. Initially, I thought she was teased about her father's remarriage. But it seemed that was not the case. Around that time, Dylan's behavior began to change. He had always been all smiles when he came for sales, but lately, he no longer showed a smile at home and often had a sulky demeanor. He also began to address me as hey and yo. As his attitude changed, so did Christina's towards me. I wondered if I was lacking something in some way. So I made sure not to slack off on housework and watched over Christina carefully. I wanted Christina to grow up to be a respectable adult. But contrary to my hopes, Christina's attitude toward me only got worse day by day. Calling me a old lady had become the norm. I never heard the words, "thank you," from Christina. It was strange that during parent-teacher conferences in elementary school, Christina was said to have a normal attitude in class, without any rough behavior. Dylan talked normally with Christina. Sometimes, he even showed a smile. That meant the terrible treatment was directed only at me. This further wounded my heart. Even if I tried to discuss it with Dylan, he was distant, completely different from before. I had no one to consult. With a heavy weight on my heart, I continued to live. I became increasingly isolated within my home, and it became worse and worse. After middle school, Christina stopped telling me about school, and Dylan attended the events. I had to learn about the dates for the sports festival and the cultural festival from the neighbors. As usual, Dylan and Christina seemed to get along well, even going out together. I also wanted to be treated as family by Dylan and Christina. I had always wanted to live happily together. That being impossible was unbearably painful. And Dylan's attitude continued to worsen. "There's dust on the stairs. Clean it up. You're a housewife, right? The toilet paper is running out. Are you even cleaning the toilet? And you're really slow." I often received such words from Dylan. Originally, when we married, we shared household chores. Dylan had been doing housework living alone with Christina. He was happy that we could share the chores initially. Now, I was doing all the work. He even once said, "Housewives doing all the chores is not right." Christina was an easy child, but that ironically stifled and depressed me. Even when I consulted with Dylan, I was dismissed with, "You're not trying hard enough." In the end, it was all my fault. The more I consulted with Dylan, the more a heavy fog clouded my heart. And he would nitpick my household mishaps relentlessly. "You can't even clean properly after all these years. Don't you learn anything?" Dylan looked at me with a disdainful expression. All I could do was apologize. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll try harder. Please forgive me." Dylan sighed dramatically. "Even if you try hard, you won't be able to do it. That's why you get scolded. You always say you'll do it, but you never have you?" Dylan's words whittled away at my heart. Time passed, and Christina turned 18. I was concerned about Christina's future path, but she didn't tell me. Dylan also didn't try to talk to me. By this time, I had stopped talking to Dylan and Christina unless absolutely necessary. I overheard Dylan and Christina discussing her future path after graduation. Though it was eavesdropping, I wanted to know, so I stopped and listened until the end. "It's decided. I can go to university with a recommendation, and I even got a scholarship. Thanks to you, Dad." "Thank you." I could hear Christina's happy voice. She would never speak to me in such a tone. "Good for you, it's the result of your efforts." It was worth shoving all the household duties onto that clueless maid. What a thing to say. Could he be referring to me as the maid? Yeah. It served as a good outlet for my stress. I could hear their scornful laughter. I quietly left the scene and retreated to the bathroom. It's the only place I can be alone. I crouched in the bathroom, holding my head and shedding tears. To think that Dylan and Christina thought of me this way. I had endured the past 10 years. No matter how close I came to breaking, I continued to be Christina's mother and Dylan's wife. Even when my heart screamed that it was too much, I forced myself to keep going. There were times I thought I couldn't get up, but I forced myself to rise, prepared lunches, made breakfast, and managed all the household chores like laundry and cleaning. If I were honest, I would have preferred to just lie down. But doing so would surely make me unnecessary to Dylan and Christina forever. That fear drove me. I spent my days exhausted. Honestly, I don't remember much about that time. One day, when I was out shopping, a neighbor shocked me with the news. Tomorrow was Christina's high school graduation ceremony. I couldn't admit I didn't know, so I just smiled vaguely and left. As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto the sofa. I had always thought I was raising Christina to be a respectable adult. Graduation from high school was supposed to be a milestone in that process. Yet again, I was the odd one out. In this house, I am forbidden from having a smartphone or using a computer. All I have is a simple flip phone that only makes calls. Dylan handles all the school interactions, so I don't have any mom friends. I have no way of knowing anything about the school. Still, from conversations with neighbors and overhearing kids on their way home from school, I learned the dates of sports days and performances and secretly attended them. I wanted to attend the high school graduation properly and celebrate her entry into adulthood. As I was crying on the sofa, Christina came home from school. "What are you lounging around for, old lady? It's so gloomy. You're making the whole house dark. Can't you do something about it?" Christina glared at me. Even though it was her fault. If Christina had told me the date of the graduation, I wouldn't feel this way. For the first time, I felt anger slowly rising from the depths of my heart. "So, the graduation is tomorrow. It seems you didn't tell me." I questioned her with a tone full of blame. Christina looked a bit startled by my defiant words, but exaggerated a sigh to cover it up. "So what? You weren't going to come to the graduation anyway. So why do you need to know the date?" I responded to Christina's words with a puzzled "huh?" I never said I wouldn't go to the graduation. Don't you dare come to my graduation. If a plain old lady shows up, everyone will laugh at me. It's my big day. Do not come. I felt dizzy at Christina's words about becoming the laughingstock of everyone. Clearly, Christina did not consider me family. To her, I was an embarrassing presence. Despite my hopes, I could not be forgiven. Christina's words, "do not come," pierced my heart. Christina had clearly told me that I was nothing but a nuisance. That night, Dylan brought home a suit in a dry cleaning bag. Apparently, he had taken his suit to be cleaned without asking me. Of course, Dylan knew about Christina's graduation. As I looked at the suit, Dylan said, "Right, you didn't hear it from Christina," and smirked at me with pity in his eyes. Clearly, I am the least needed in this house. Thinking I was part of the family was just my own delusion. At that moment, I realized that my heart had long reached its limit. So, I decided it was time to end being part of this family. The next day, Dylan and Christina left together for Christina's high school graduation. I have been left behind. Moreover, Dylan told me, "We're eating out tonight, so don't bother making dinner." I wasn't invited. In the past, I would have just silently accepted such treatment. But today marks the end of those days. I had decided to leave this house. I made up my mind last night. As soon as the two of them left the house, I quickly packed my bags, left a note, and left the house. I can no longer be a part of Dylan and Christina's family. I decided to take refuge in my parents' home, about 2 hours away by train. At my parents' house, I will prepare to sever my ties with Dylan and Christina. The note I left at home stated that I want to cut familial ties and live on my own, and that I would like any further details to be discussed through a lawyer. Although I hadn't found a lawyer as of yesterday, I knew my father could introduce me to one. My family has owned extensive lands for generations and has lived as wealthy landowners. My father owns considerable real estate and is known as a prominent figure in the area. He certainly knows some lawyers through his social circles. I remember meeting a lawyer during a Christmas greeting when I was at my parents' house. Besides finding a lawyer, I also need to handle the sale of the house where Dylan and Christina currently live. That house, located on land owned by my father, was built with construction costs I provided as a wedding gift. I have been repaying my father gradually with money earned from my part-time job in real estate. The part-time job in real estate was also through my father's introduction. The building and the land are both legally owned by my father. It is also in that name legally. At the time, Dylan probably thought the house was a gift and never asked about the ownership details. Probably, Dylan was afraid to upset my father and risk not receiving the house as a gift. Dylan is an extreme home tyrant. He is tough on those he sees as beneath him but grovels to those above him. I shared all these events as I spoke, and tears uncontrollably streamed down my face. I had to pause several times because of my sobbing, but my father listened to everything. I saw tears in his eyes too. I was relieved that my father did not criticize my decisions at the time. In the end, my father said, "You've been through a lot." After that, my father made calls here and there. And lawyers and real estate management people came to our house. Everything happened very quickly after that. It was decided to demolish the house. The demolition is set for a week from now. In the note, I wrote, "Please leave within a week." My father said with heavy irony, "That's very kind of you. I just didn't want any complaints later on." A week passed as I discussed the divorce with the lawyer. I also told my mother about the divorce, and she cried with me. I'll never forget the moment my mother's face turned momentarily fierce. I also discussed the future with my father. Above all, I needed to establish a new base for my life. It took courage to talk to my parents, and it was painful, but once I had talked about it, my heart felt lighter, and for the first time in 10 years, I slept soundly. A week later, while peacefully at my parents' home, I received a call on my cell phone. As expected, it was Christina. Honestly, I didn't want to talk anymore. Remembering Christina's past treatment darkened my heart. I decided to ignore it. However, the calls continued, and Dylan also called repeatedly. They must be calling about the note. Perhaps they were contacted by the demolition company. For 10 years, Dylan and Christina have been calling me old lady and yo, exploiting me. The way they treated me could hardly be described as familial. The thought of dealing with Dylan and Christina again sends shivers down my spine. However, it's not right to continue like this. I need to settle the past properly to move forward. If I just keep running away, I won't feel at peace. After all the terrible treatment I received, I owe Dylan and Christina a thorough response. Resolved, I answered the phone. "Hey, old lady. Where are you now?" As soon as I answered my phone, Christina's shrill voice pierced my ears. Her tone was hurried, a panic seeping through. It seemed that they were in a state of panic. How could you think leaving such a ridiculous note would be forgiven? Where are you now? Come back right now. I could hear Dylan's voice too. Both of them were frantic. I imagined Christina coming back from her graduation ceremony. When she returned from the ceremony, there was no old lady to vent her stress on, as the substitute servant was gone. Moreover, there was a note saying she wanted a divorce and for them to move out. Anyone would panic in that situation, especially on the day of her shining graduation ceremony. I couldn't help but let out a little laugh at Christina's frantic state. Who is this? Christina was taken aback by the unexpected response. I hung up the phone. Afterward, I called the real estate management company to check when the demolition would start. The demolition was scheduled for tomorrow as planned, and Dylan had been notified. I requested to postpone the demolition to the day after tomorrow, and asked them to inform Dylan about the one-day delay. A day's reprieve had been granted. Dylan would likely come here. That's when I would deliver the final blow to Dylan and Christina. They called me dozens of times, but I ignored all of them. The next day, around noon, I heard the doorbell ring. I also heard banging on the front door. It must be Dylan and Christina. They probably wanted to come earlier, but due to poor connections, it took an incredible amount of time. Dylan and Christina were panting heavily. They must have rushed here. My parents were waiting in the back by prior arrangement, so it appeared that I was the only one home. I led Dylan and Christina into the living room. Dylan entered the house hesitantly. He's always been uncomfortable around my father. My father is a wealthy landowner and a prominent figure in the town. Moreover, he has a commanding presence. Dylan probably sees him as a superior. On the other hand, Christina isn't intimidated. She seems fully intent on overpowering me and dragging me back. Christina slumped into the living room chair, crossing her legs with authority. She silently motioned for me to sit opposite her while folding her arms. I leisurely prepared some coffee, taking my time before sitting across from her. Christina, growing impatient, addressed me. "What is this all about?" Dylan, sitting next to her, placed the note I had left on the table. I remained silent, just staring into Christina's eyes. She looked away first, trying to dispel the awkwardness by laughing. "What was with the 'who is this' yesterday?" That was some poor acting. I continued to stare at her silently. Christina became uncomfortable under my gaze and shifted in her seat, continuing her words. "You're just a clumsy old lady. You can't survive without us, you're just trash." I almost reacted to Christina's harsh words, but I held back because I noticed a tremor in her voice. Christina must be putting on a strong front. Dylan has remained silent so far. He seems to be just watching how things unfold. Stop being stubborn and come back home. Christina is using harsh words to confuse and drag me back home. The more agitated Christina became, the more calmly I responded. "I don't have a family, do I?" "Oh, I do have parents. But you two aren't my family, are you?" Christina, likely feeling cornered, started raising her voice. "What are you talking about? Daddy and I are your family, right?" "Right, Daddy?" Christina, feeling disadvantaged alone, started seeking Dylan's support. Dylan glanced around to make sure no one was there, and, seeming relieved, he spoke to me. "That's right, just like Christina said, you can't live without us. So come back." Dylan began to act arrogantly once he realized my parents were not around. Looking back, I realize what a cowardly man he is. Therefore, I have no family. I responded decisively. No matter what Dylan and Christina might say, I will continue to treat them as strangers. Dylan and Christina are not my family. If they were family, they wouldn't treat me like a slave. A family should support and help each other, and when someone is in trouble, the family should be there to support them. However, Dylan and Christina were different. They treated me as a servant and an outlet for stress for 10 years. Dylan and Christina insist that this is normal. They don't realize how terrible and wrong it is. They have oppressed me unconsciously. I am amazed I endured it for 10 years. I am impressed with myself. It all started when I first saw Christina looking up at me. I was bound by the promise I made to myself to raise Christina into a respectable adult. For this promise, I did everything I could for Dylan and Christina. That's why I endured until Christina's high school graduation. I had decided that Christina's graduation would be the time to end our relationship. I had a faint hope that by the time of her high school graduation, Dylan and Christina would have a change of heart and improve their behavior towards me. Dylan and Christina, as expected, betrayed my expectations, leading to this situation. Everything was decided by their behavior the day before the graduation ceremony. That's why I am facing them with the appropriate attitude now. Dylan and Christina are no longer my family. That's why I won't treat them as family. Christina seemed to realize the meaning. of my treating Dylan and her as strangers and changed her approach. Mom and I are family, aren't we? Stop the silly act, please. Somewhere along the way, old lady has changed to a mom. It seems Christina has begun to realize that things won't go as they used to. Dylan, too, is anxiously watching Christina and me. You're not my birth mother, but we've lived together all this time. So hear me out. Christina unfolded her arms and clasped her hands in front of her. She had been sitting back confidently, but now she leaned forward. I have no obligation to listen to requests from someone who isn't family. I continue to respond coldly, suppressing my emotions. Tears appeared in Christina's eyes. She desperately pleaded. Please. Listen. That note was a lie, right? You're not really selling the house, are you? It can't be true. Because you're family, aren't you? The way Christina referred to me as Mom disgusted me. Moreover, what Christina was really concerned about was the house. She was anxious about losing the house. The loss of the house is indeed real. But the fact that her main concern is the place to live, not whether I am there, raises a question. Ultimately, it seems they just need a place to live without me. No matter how desperately Christina begs, my feelings won't change. Christina lowered her face. She seems to be crying. What kind of joke is this? Stop your condescending tone. Dylan, perhaps unsettled by seeing Christina's tears, lashed out at me. What was that note all about? Come back right now and stop the construction. Dylan ranted angrily, speaking rapidly. I cannot do that. It has already been decided. I continue to answer with a suppressed emotional tone. Do you think you can do this to your family and be forgiven? That's why I keep saying you are not my family. It seems neither Dylan nor Christina is willing to listen at all. Please stop. Haven't I already told you that we are not family? How many times do I have to repeat the same words? Dylan suddenly stood up and slammed his fist on the table. Don't joke with me. I was startled, but I desperately suppressed my emotions and did not react. Who is joking? After not treating me like family for 10 years. You can't suddenly act like we are. It's impossible, isn't it? My voice came out harsher than I intended. I am angry too. Though I'm not showing it, anger is bubbling up from deep within me like erupting magma. I could not forgive Dylan and Christina's selfish actions that had tormented me for so long. They trampled on the hellish suffering I endured for 10 years and my efforts to overcome it. I tried to become a family with Dylan and Christina. However, they rejected that, mocked me, and used me terribly. They will never understand how lonely and painful it was to be the outcast. I wished many times to be treated like family, but my wishes were never fulfilled. It took me 10 years to give up. Despite my efforts to build a relationship as Christina's mother and as a family, it ended like this. A self-mocking smile appeared on my face. Seeing my dry smile, Dylan and Christina stared at me in shock. Dylan seemed to lose his strength and slumped back into his chair. These two, instead of understanding my feelings, try to use me until the very end. No matter how much I cared for Dylan and Christina, they never cared for me. Even though I valued them, they never valued me. And yet, when they find themselves in a tight spot, they suddenly say we're family and try to use me. It's far too convenient. I feel nauseated, not just a headache. Why did I endure them for 10 years? Looking back, it seems inexplicable. But reflecting on it now is pointless. A future together with Dylan and Christina is impossible. All I can do now is make them acknowledge their faults and atone. I no longer expect or trust anything from Christina or Dylan. Dylan got up, knelt on the floor, and apologized. I'm sorry. Please come back. I beg you. Even if he begs and apologizes, it does not touch my heart. I will not offer a helping hand or live with them again. Enough already. I'm not your family anymore. I'm a stranger to you. Christina, following Dylan's example, also put her hands on the floor and started to apologize, rubbing her forehead on the ground. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. We're family, so I want to go back home together. I am astounded by their self-serving attitude. After treating me like a stranger for 10 years, what now? Come back because we're family? Did you think I'd just say okay? That's too naive. There's no way that's happening. It seems I'm losing my ability to remain calm. Words spill out impulsively. Words I would never have said before are coming out of my mouth. Words I had been holding back out of consideration for Dylan and Christina are now pouring out one after another. I don't want to hear excuses. I can't trust any of your words. I can never think of us as family again. At that moment, I placed a document in front of Dylan. It's a divorce petition. Of course, it already has my signature. Just write the divorce petition now. I'll file it myself. Right here. Dylan shook his head from side to side. Then, Dylan gave me a smile. Think it over, huh? Please? I am disgusted by Dylan's lack of dignity. He truly is a small man. I had always misunderstood Dylan's obsequious smile. The smile Dylan had shown when we first met, the one I thought was kind and friendly, was actually a sleazy expression he used to size people up. Even now, thinking about it makes me angry. I stood up and called for my parents who were in the back. Soon, my parents appeared in the living room. Dylan's mouth dropped open so wide, you'd think his jaw might dislocate. Ah. Father. My father glared sharply at Dylan. My mother also looked stern. Dylan, merely from being glared at, shrank back and hunched his shoulders. I'm very sorry. He was rubbing his head on the floor in apology. And he even pushed Christina's head down to the floor. This trouble has been caused by Lucy's misbehavior. And I apologize for troubling you and mother-in-law. I thought I must have heard wrong. My misbehavior? Could Dylan still be trying to dodge responsibility at this point? My father's eyebrows twitched, but he remained silent. Lucy, well, Ms. Holmes, left the house on her own. We were just trying to persuade her to come back, right, Christina? Dylan prompted Christina to agree with his absurd story. Lucy's misbehavior? Don't be ridiculous. His voice boomed throughout the house, causing the windows to rattle. Dylan and Christina gasped and held their breath. My father stood before Dylan, bent down to meet his gaze. How could you possibly interpret Lucy's actions as selfish? You only think of yourself. You really are a small man. He then turned to Christina. You too, you've gone along with this man and done terrible things. What did you think of Lucy? Fool. Once again, my father's voice echoed loudly. Christina was visibly shaking, probably terrified. My father stood tall, glaring down at them both. Christina, you've also been causing trouble at school. We've done our research. Indeed, my father had hired a private investigator through his connections. And they found out that Christina had been extorting money from a fellow student at school. The victimized student, too scared to speak to anyone, was being prepared for a criminal complaint by my father's efforts. Just as she looked down on me, Christina did the same at school. Christina exclaimed in shock, lies. She snitched, didn't she? I felt like I was seeing Christina's true nature. She showed no remorse. She was only thinking about getting through this situation. Dylan, you too. You've been embezzling company funds. This was also revealed by the private investigator. Dylan had repeatedly faked business trips. I had hired the investigator to strengthen my case for divorce. But they uncovered unbelievable facts about both of them. Why would you go that far? Was it her? Dylan's reaction was like Christina's. No remorse. Terrible at facing the end. I was determined that my punishment wouldn't be enough. They also needed to face societal sanctions. Then, my mother finally spoke up. Enough, the discussion is over. Sign the divorce papers and leave this house immediately. Dylan was sobbing, muttering no, no. But he finally gave in when my father forced a pen into his hand. He sat down, signed the divorce papers. I glanced at the clock. It's almost 7 p.m. The last train heading up leaves at 7:30 p.m. If they miss it, there won't be another train until tomorrow morning. It's a small town. There are no taxis available. If Dylan and Christina miss the last train, they won't make it back in time for the demolition tomorrow. They probably haven't even packed their bags, thinking they could persuade me. As I was debating whether to tell them, Christina suddenly spoke up with an unbelievable suggestion in a sulky tone. But, this divorce was initiated by you, old lady. Dad should get compensation. It seemed Christina had resigned herself to revealing everything. Both my parents looked shocked. That's impossible, what you've done is considered domestic violence and a crime. Christina flinched for a moment but then defiantly replied, "Show me the proof then." I placed a notebook on the table. This is the diary I started keeping since we got married. Christina, with a mocking look, glared at me. You don't even have a smartphone or computer. What kind of proof could you possibly have? It seems you don't know that a diary can be significant evidence. Not all evidence has to be video, audio, or photos. Christina looked stunned. That's right, even the lawyer agreed. This diary is substantial evidence. Dylan and Christina, appearing resigned, hung their heads. I dramatically checked my watch. Looks like the last train has left. You won't be able to get home tonight. Mother looked at Dylan and Christina with a composed expression. Indeed. There are no taxis around here either. I wonder if there's a decent hotel nearby. Well, our business here is done. Please leave now. Dylan and Christina, as if being chased out, left the house. From the second-floor balcony, I could see them hurrying toward the station. Probably unable to believe how early the last train was. Watching Dylan and Christina's flustered departure, I felt as if a burden had lifted from my shoulders. There were still some loose ends to tie up, but it felt like it was finally over. Dylan and Christina, having missed the train, ended up walking for about an hour to find a hotel to stay in. The next day, when they got home, the demolition was underway. But they managed to salvage only their clothing. In fact, I had temporarily stored everything in the house, including furniture, appliances, and my personal belongings, in a storage facility, but I didn't tell Dylan and Christina. Later, the lawyer informed me that the divorce was finalized, including a claim for compensation. Dylan was reluctant to pay, but I managed to apply pressure through his company to ensure he complied. Reports from the private investigator revealed that Dylan had been fired from his company for embezzlement. Christina ended up in trouble with the police and was expelled from high school, making university no longer an option. Jobless Dylan could only afford to rent an old, cramped apartment far from any station. He and high school dropout Christina are living there together. Christina blames everything on Dylan, and Dylan criticizes her at every turn. The investigator reported that they are constantly fighting. I quit my part-time job at the real estate agency and was wondering what to do next. Then, my father suggested I help with the family business, and I took a job at his resort property management company. Life in the resort area is very different from living in the city, but being surrounded by nature has been a refreshing change. I've also started keeping a dog, so I'm not lonely living alone. Having a family-like presence is enough for me now. I plan to live a relaxed life with just me and my dog.